Coming up on today's show.
So success, that's what most people want. Of course, the first thing I ask people is define what success means to you.
Of course, you never have enough money yourself, but he said, you'd be surprised how many miserable millionaires there are.
So I like to think of the difference between perfectionism and having good, high-quality standards as the difference between a block to success and something that can help you be successful.
The 3 blocks to success today on Keeping You Organized. Well, hello and welcome to Keeping You Organized. Today we're going to talk about those blocks, those things that stop you from being successful, whether it be in life or productivity or whatever, because sometimes getting to where we want to get, there are these roadblocks in the way. And so we're bringing on Lisa Montanaro from lisamontanaro.com. Lisa, welcome to Keeping You Organized.
Hi, John. Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Well, listen, you had a talk on this, which I saw on your, you do a lot of public speaking, and you have some topics. And this one was Cinderella actually had 3 ugly stepsisters. The 3 blocks to success. How did you come up with that name? Let's get a little backstory on that.
That's a great question. I actually don't remember. I was on stage and I was talking about different blocks to success. And oftentimes there's a trifecta or a trilogy. 3 is kind of a magical number. People remember it. It has good stickiness. And I think it just came to me. I just said, these are sort of the ugly stepsisters. I said, in fact, Cinderella really had 3. And it got a laugh. And so I just used it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a universal thing where, kind of Cinderella was the successful one, and the other stepsisters didn't do too well. So there's a lot of that foreshadowing and kind of movie stuff in there too. So anyway, yeah. It's kind of fun. Well, let's talk a little bit maybe on broad terms about the 3 blocks, and then we'll kind of dig into them one by one so we can get a context for what we're going to be talking about today.
Sure. So success, that's what most people want. Of course, the first thing I ask people is define what success means to you. But let's say success means being able to get things done, to be productive, to be happy, to be satisfied. You could argue that what most people want is to be successful. Maybe some people would argue, well, I really want to be happy, but maybe success equals happiness for them. So when you think about it, I started to study what gets in the way of people being successful. And oftentimes it's not what people think. People think that it's something external. I don't have the right job, or, I'm disorganized, or, I'm waiting to make a certain amount of money. Years ago, I saw Marshall Goldsmith speak at the National Speakers Association. And if you're not familiar with his work, any of you listening, just go to marshallgoldsmith.com. I believe that's his website, or just Google Marshall Goldsmith. And he's a prolific writer and speaker. And he said that we all suffer from what he calls the Great Western Disease, which is I'll be happy when, I'll be successful when, ... And we wait for our happiness and we wait for our success. And we need to stop waiting, and we need to embrace our lives and our careers now and figure out what it takes to be successful. Right. So I came up with these 3 blocks to help people figure out what's getting in the way, if anything, of their success, and to try to work through them.
Well, it's interesting. This just popped into my mind. I was talking to a financial planner a few weeks ago, and, of course, you never have enough money yourself, but he said, you'd be surprised how many miserable millionaires there are. It's like people who, they get here, but they're not here. They only have a couple $1 million, not 10, or they don't have $1 billion because they only have 50 million or whatever it is,
right.
And so
it's almost like the target keeps moving.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
For everyone. Yeah. And that's a really interesting, separate psychological study also that a lot of people have done, is that, and you and I have talked about this in the past about goal setting. And every time you reach a goal, for some people, the minute they reach the goal, or even before they reach it, they're already figuring out what the next one is. And in some ways, that is what makes some people successful. Right. Successful people do set goals, plan ahead, execute, implement, have accountability plans in place. So there is something to be said for that, but we also have to be careful that we give ourselves a chance to enjoy our success or enjoy the goals that we've actually reached.
Right. Well, let's talk about the 3 areas kind of broadly here, and maybe just touch on each one, and then we'll dig into them. The first one is what?
The first one is the perfection trap. And the perfection trap is when people are perfectionists. And people will often say to me, they'll challenge me, like if I'm speaking to an audience, they'll say, well, isn't perfectionism good? To an extent. Yes, to an extent. So I like to think of the difference between perfectionism and having good, high quality standards as the difference between a block to success and something that can help you be successful. So for example, if you have really good standards for yourself and you say, okay, until something reaches this level of quality, then it's not perfect to me. And that's different than perfectionism getting in the way of you being able to complete things and to get things done and to release them into the world.
Right.
So when you think of the perfection trap, the trap is nothing is ever good enough, and therefore you don't actually get things done. You may start a lot of things, but you never have that sense of completion.
Well, we'll dig into that more in a moment, because I'm thinking about the idea of, even being a perfectionist is not really necessarily successful, but I'm sure we're going to touch on a little bit about that. All right. What's the second block to success?
So the second one, if the first one, the perfection trap, think of it as an internal block because it really is coming from within yourself. The second one is the comparison trap, and that's external. That's where you look outwardly at everyone else and think you don't measure up. So you're constantly in comparison mode. And again, it's a trap because it's a block and it gets in the way of your success. It's very difficult for some people to pull themselves out of the comparison trap. And we could talk a little bit more about how you can avoid the comparison trap.
Yes, and I bet social media plays into that somehow too. All right, what's the third one?
The third one is known as the imposter syndrome.
Okay.
And it has been widely written about and studied, mostly in psychological areas. And what I think is interesting about the imposter syndrome is I would call it an internal trap, like perfectionism. But some people feel that the comparison trap feeds into, it's like a nice, sad pathway into the imposter syndrome. But think of the imposter syndrome where you feel like a fake. So it's a little different than the comparison trap, because comparison trap, you're looking at other people and thinking you don't measure up. And imposter syndrome is you just don't think you have what it takes. You don't feel competent. You don't feel confident.
Okay.
So it's really about you feeling fake.
Well, I can't wait to dig into these. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll get into that first one, the perfection trap. We're talking about the 3 blocks to success with Lisa Montanaro here on Keeping You Organized, and we'll be right back. Now, there's a place just for you. Life can be busy, and you still have to keep it all together. That's why you like to be organized and in control. Introducing MyOrganized.life. A special place where you can get ideas and solutions to organize what's important to you, your important papers, your important decisions, your important life events. We show you the ideas and products to stay organized in your life. See what's new. Stop by and say hello. Visit us at any time at www.myorganized.life. It's just for you. MyOrganized.life by SMEAD. Find us at www.myorganized.life. MyOrganized.life. We're back now on Keeping You Organized, talking about the 3 blocks to success, what keeps us from productivity, what keeps us from success in life. Lisa Montanaro, lisamontanaro.com. We kind of did the overview before the break, and now we're ready to get into block number 1, or ugly stepsister number 1, kind of as the original title went, and that is the perfection trap. Let's define it a little bit and get some good examples of how that actually can be a block.
Sure. So think of the perfection trap as something that can cause you to second guess yourself. So what it does is every time you think you're done, the perfection trap will say, nope, not quite yet. This could be better. This could be best. This could be perfect. And so it actually causes a lot of procrastination, or just it causes you to feel that you're not finished with something. Now, to be fair, you and I know that sometimes you're not finished. Right. Sometimes you legitimately need to keep working on something. So let's say you're working on a report and it has an introduction 2 points and a conclusion, and you haven't written the second point and the conclusion, clearly you wouldn't be done. But I'm talking about when you're second guessing yourself constantly because you don't think it's good enough. That's the perfection trap. The perfection trap causes you to lose your confidence and not be able to complete things.
And, I hear a lot of this, like in the software industry, they say, just ship it, get it good enough to get out the door, and then we'll, iterate and make the bug fixes after people have used it for a while. But I think we're talking a little bit different. This is probably a state of mind that some people have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a better way to look at it. So it's not necessarily about external things like a team saying like, hey, let's beta test this. And so, and I often tell people that I'm like, one thing to think about is to get out of the perfection trap, could you say to yourself, this is my first iteration of this. And could you actually let people know this is a charter program? This is a beta program that tells people, that's code for it's not perfect.
Right.
And so maybe you just own up to it. One thing that I did for myself years ago, my background is as an attorney before I became a productivity consultant and speaker, and I definitely suffered from the perfection trap, but I had to get things done in order to move forward with my law practice. So I put a little sticky note on my computer and it said, done is better than perfect.
Yes.
And I really had to abide by that. If you look at the root of the word perfect, I believe it's Latin, and it actually means to complete. And so I started thinking, okay, so if it's done, if it's complete, it's perfect. Right. And then you can always perfect it a little more later on. And in fact, the better thing to do for successful people, what they do is they do a first pass and they do it as well as they can with as high standards as they can. And then they release it. And then they go back and study it and get feedback on it and make it better for the next time. Right. And so that's actually what makes really successful people very successful is they learn from their mistakes and they move forward, but they're not afraid to make the mistakes in the first place.
Well, this as a speaker, right? You do practice speeches before you give it so you can work out some of the bugs and actually part of it is giving you more confidence too, doesn't it? Kind of like that the material well.
Yes. And I think about this actually with my stage performing as an actress, singer, and dancer. You're never going to open a show and it's going to be perfect. I mean, there's always something going on at the last dress rehearsal and there's always something going wrong, but you perfect the show during the run. So you're right. There's rehearsal for business, there's rehearsal in life, there's rehearsal on stage. And so I want people to realize that what I'm not advocating is to put out shoddy work. Right. I'm not advocating for you to lower your standards. I'm advocating for you to keep your standards high, but make sure you release things and get them out into the world. Right. There's a great quote that I want to share with you by Wynne Borden. If you wait to do everything until you're sure it's right, you'll probably never do much of anything. And successful people do a lot of everything. Right. So that's why this becomes a real block to success. We have to make sure that we're not waiting for everything to be lined up, for all the stars to be lined up correctly, because usually it's not going to happen.
What about people that are kind of just don't think they can do it? So maybe they lack the confidence. And how do you help them get to the point where they're okay? Because I know people like this. They're constantly lowering expectations. It's like, I'm not really that good at this or whatever. How do you overcome that lack of confidence piece of doing it the right way or the perfect way?
I think that's a great question, because if someone's having a confidence crisis, then we want to get to the core of, first of all, is it a legitimate confidence crisis? In other words, do they not have the competency? So let's say you said, I'm going to go do a century ride, a 100K bike ride, but you've never trained. You might be having a confidence crisis around that, and it might be legitimate, because I might say, you know what, John, you really have to train for this. Right. Or you're getting ready to do your first keynote, but you haven't prepped. So that's where the work comes in. The pre-work comes in before you reach the goal. And so if it's a legitimate confidence crisis, I would say to someone, what does it take competency-wise to get you where you need to go? And then let's reverse engineer and get you there. Let's work on building your confidence by building your competency. Mm-hmm. Usually, I think, not always, but sometimes lack of confidence legitimately coincides with lack of competency. And the more you build your skills, the more confident you get. Right. But if someone has the skills, has the talent, and yet they're still not very confident. I'm going to fast forward us. We'll talk about this next time, but that usually is the imposter syndrome.
Right.
And so that's a more deep level psychological issue than just perfectionism.
Right. Well, if we were doing the perfect podcast right here, we would be ending in about 25 seconds. So you know what that means. I'm going to have to get you back on the next episode so we can finish the other two areas. You up for that?
Yes, absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay. Before we go, though, I want, again, this to be perfect. Tell us a little bit about your business, how people can get a hold of you.
Sure, absolutely. Easy to find me. Just go to lisamontanaro.com. You can also find me on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and pretty much under Lisa Montanaro. I'm located in Davis, California, but serving the globe virtually. And yeah, would love to hear from anyone that has had a chance to watch, listen, and learn.
Yes, and you have a lot of great resources on your site too, so I encourage people to go to your site, check out what you have there. We'll also link it in our show notes. So Lisa, we'll get you back next time for the last two blocks to success, and then we'll wrap up this podcast and say, folks, if you want to know the whole deal, you have to come back next time on Keeping You Organized.